Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 32 of the video series where I critique and process your image. Now, to tell you the truth, I thought this video series had run its course, but my friend Pete sent me this image of his daughter Julie, and he wanted to get my opinion on how I might go about processing this image. And Pete is a fine photographer, and I have no doubt he could process this image better than I could. But sometimes it's good to get somebody else's insight and their opinions on how they might go about doing it. So I'm happy to do that. And I think we'll start out with just a small critique to begin with, and we'll look over here at the camera settings. We're at 1/125th of a second, f4, ISO 200. I think those settings work out well for this shot. The exposure's fine. She's wearing dark clothing, but you'll see once we process it and open up the shadows that we'll get the detail out of the clothing, so that won't be a problem. The blacks aren't crushed. There's nothing blown out in the shot. So really well done. F4 just gives you enough depth of field where Julie is in focus and the background's a little bit blurred, so not too bad. Now the lens is a 55 to 250, and Pete shot at 55 millimeters. And there's two things I want you to keep in mind about your lens when you're doing this type of photography. And I'm going to call this lifestyle photography, where you have a person somewhere out somewhere. And it could be environmental photography too, where you have somebody working, but they're out somewhere doing something. And you're going to have the environment in the shot like you would in an environmental photo or in a lifestyle shot. Now, at 55 millimeters, that's kind of the angle of view of what we see. So the first thing you got to keep in mind about your lens is angle of view. The wider your lens is, the more the background you're gonna get in the shot, and the background's going to be further away from you. Okay? The narrower your angle of view, meaning if you shot this lens at 250 millimeters, you'd have a very narrow angle of view, and the background would be pulled closer to you, and you would actually have less of this background in the shot. Now that is called compression. When you use like a zoom lens or a telephoto lens and the background gets compressed, pushed towards you, and when you use a wide angle lens, it gets pushed further away. And that's the second thing I want you to think about when you're shooting this type of photography with your lens. Keep in mind your angle of view and the compression that you're going to get with the given focal length you choose to use. And to better illustrate it, I just went out and took a couple really quick pictures, and I really didn't do a very good job. This is downtown Buffalo. They're doing a construction site. This is like within walking distance from my studio. And I ran down here real quick, and I used a 70 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. And this was, well, it's a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. I shot at 70 millimeters. And this is the shot I took. And I just tried to get these poles here, posts, kind of on each side of the frame, and I took a picture of the sign. But I want you to really take note of the background. Now what I did next is I stepped further away, and I actually stepped a little too far away, but I stepped further away, but I zoomed my lens into 200 millimeters. Now look at the background and see how it's pulled closer to us. There it's further away. We have even this, I was on a little bridge. These little like decorative whatever things on the bridge, these iron things, are like totally in the shot, right? And then when I step back but zoomed into 200 millimeters, they're barely in the shot. The entire background is pulled more towards me. That's compression. So you could see, like, take a look here, this doorway here. I think that's a doorway on that building. And you could see it's like zoomed way in now. It's like you can't even really, I guess it's over here. So that's something that Pete could have did with this shot. Now I don't know, this could have been a narrow dock, and if Pete tried to walk backwards, he would have got wet. But maybe it isn't. Maybe he could have zoomed in to 250 millimeters, took several steps backwards, framed her in the identical manner, and what would have happened is his angle of view would have been much more narrow, and the background would have been compressed much closer to him, and it probably wouldn't have been as busy looking. So that's what something you could control when you're out doing this type of photography. Remember that angle of view, take in how much of the background you want to take in, and use the appropriate focal length maybe to get some compression so that you're getting less of the background in. Another thing you'll find, a third factor I should add, about a lens when you're doing this choice, generally speaking, when you use a longer lens, you have less depth of field. So you might not be able to afford maybe one of those 85 millimeter f1.2 lenses, but you could use a 300 millimeter f4.5 lens and stand further away, and it has less depth of field, and it actually will blur out the background maybe just as effectively as that 1.2. And so something to think about too. It doesn't really come as, it's not as clear here, or it's not as obvious here. At 70 millimeters, this building back here, this is Harbor Center, is kind of blurry, but it is considerably more blurry here. So it helps give you more blur also. So something to think about when you're out doing this type of photography. Sometimes it might be conducive for you to zoom in. Now other times, I'm going to belabor this point a little bit, you might want to be zoomed out a little more. It might be a beautiful sunset. Julie's on a beach instead of on this, and there's this beautiful sunset, and Pete wants to get that as much as that sunset in his shot as possible. So he's going to go a little wider and get a lot more of that background in the shot. So that's creative choices you make as a photographer. Now, as far as the composition itself, I like it. What you want to avoid when you're taking someone's picture out, outside of a studio, is you want to make sure you don't have lines going through them. And Pete did a nice job of having this opposite shoreline not really cut through her face. Or a lot of times if you take images of people on the beach, it seems like the horizon line is often cutting through their neck. It just seems to line up that way. And you want to avoid that. So you want your subject either completely below or completely above any like horizontal lines. You don't want them cutting through their body at all. And or you don't want anything growing out of their head. So if there's trees or something in the background or a pole, you don't want that coming out from their head. So Pete did a nice job in that regard here. So the composition is nice, tiny bit crooked, so we're going to straighten it. So that's what I'm going to start with, I think. And again, like I mentioned, this is all down to personal choice when you do this, any processing. It comes down to your personality. Also, you could actually process images that might reflect the personality of your subject. If you photograph somebody and they tend to be dark and moody, you could photograph them in such a way that will be conducive to you doing post-processing that will give them that dark and moody feel. And conversely, maybe they're light and airy, and you could photograph them in a way and then do post-processing in a way that will give that like light and airy look to them. So that's, like I said, and that's how probably Pete could process this image a lot better than me. One of the many factors of why he might be able to process this image better than me, because he knows Julie's personality. So I just cropped it so this line back here is straight, right here. And it looks pretty straight, so we'll go with that. So that's that. Now, that was straightening it. I said crop, but I straightened it. Now, I think I might want to crop it a little bit. I mentioned before that the background to me is just a little busy, and I think it distracts from Julie, and we want the attention on Julie. So I think what we'll do is we'll just tighten it up a little bit. Now, I'm kind of ignoring rule of thirds and things like that because it's really just a bullseye shot. So we're really not, we don't have enough pixels here to do something with rule of thirds or something with maybe the golden ratio or something like that. So we're just going to bullseye Julie. And, that's fine too. It doesn't, mean that it's a horrible shot because it's bullseyed. Sometimes you do want an image bullseyed, but sometimes you'd like it, to experiment a little bit and do something else. So I'm just going to tighten it up a little bit to try to eliminate a little bit of that background. But I'm still going to try to keep it balanced by keeping Julie more in the middle. So we'll go with that. All right, so that's good so far. Now we're going to go down to the basic panel, and I think I want to, it is relatively warm, but I think I want it a little warmer. If I go with auto, I found that as shot with Canon cameras, sometimes tends to be a little bit cooler than if you use auto in Lightroom, and I think that warmed it up nice. So I think that looks good. I'm not really going to manually move the sliders at all. I just want it a little bit warmer so it's a little bit more of a sunset look. Now we'll jump right down here, and I'm just going to move the sliders and look at the image. And the first thing I want to do is open up the shadows just a little bit. So I'm jumping around. I just want to see some detail on her dark outfit. And you can see when I opened up the shadows, let's reset them, that it brought out a little bit of that warmth too from the light. You can see how they're lighting it up, but it's nice and warm looking. So I like that. So let's just move highlights, I think just barely. I'm going to move those up just a touch. I usually don't do whites and blacks yet, and I'm going to bring vibrance up just a little. And I don't really, you guys kind of know my style now. I don't really move vibrance up a lot or saturation up a lot. And I tend to not do a lot with clarity, whereas I know a lot of great photographers that turn clarity way up. Now contrast kind of defeated everything I wanted to do, with the warm light on her clothing. So I'm not going to add anything with the tone curve. And I'm just going to eyeball it and move the whites and black slider around. And I think that's good. So really no technical adjustments of the sliders, meaning I didn't hold in the Alt or Option key and double click on move a slider, or I didn't hold the Shift key in and double click on a slider or anything like that. And we'll add a little clarity now. Usually I particularly don't like to add a lot of clarity if someone's face is in the shot. Usually clarity will just make their lines on their face and everything look a lot harsher. So I don't like to do that generally. All right, so I think I'm done with the basic panel. I am going to go with the brush here, and I'm going to reset it by double clicking on Effect. And I want to go to clarity and pull it down. And I'm going to get a little smaller of a brush. And I just want to try to blur that just a little bit. And so I have clarity all the way down. And let's see, we'll take sharpness down a little bit too. We'll take it all the way down. Sometimes when you do this, you'll find that you're making it darker. Even though I didn't adjust exposure at all, it's just the blurring effect kind of made it a little bit darker. And if that happens sometimes, and you don't want it to happen, you have to go and maybe push exposure up just a tiny bit. Now I want to make sure that I didn't get any on her forehead up there. So I'm just going to hover over the button there to see where I painted. And I'm going to just click there and turn it on permanently. Then I'm going to hold the Shift key in, and I'll turn into a plus magnifier here, and I'm going to zoom in. And I did get it on a little bit, so I'm going to go to the erase brush, and I'm just going to erase it from her. I don't want it on her. And on my erase brush, I have feather and flow all the way up. So completely erasing it from her hat and everything. And I kind of overdid it there. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen the other here. I have to get a smaller brush to do it the right way. Oops, I have auto mask on. That's why it's getting blotchy looking there. Okay. Now, to switch between brushes, I'm just pushing in the Alt or Option key. It's Alt if you have a PC, Option if that you have a Mac. Right now I have the erase brush selected or active. So when I push in the Alt or Option key, I'll get the actual brush I was using. Just try to edge that in there a little better. And vice versa, if I was on an actual brush and I held the Alt or Option key in, I would get the erase brush. So we're going to turn off that mask overlay. We're going to close our brush down. And we're going to zoom out. Okay, so far so good. It's really not that difficult of a shot really to process in my opinion. It's rather basic and I'm just going to be doing it in Lightroom. Now, at this point, I think I'll just do some blemish removal. So I'm going to get the spot removal tool. And there's, again, it's kind of a lifestyle shot, so and it's a full body shot. So, she's relatively further away from the camera than like a portrait. And it's actually a lot easier to do this to a portrait than it would be to a shot like this that you don't have as much to work with. So I'm not going to go too crazy here. I'm just going to do a few real quick. There. Is that one? I'm going to go to the tool overlay and I'm going to turn it never so it's off. So I could just come in here and I don't have those overlays bothering me. I'm going to push in the space bar. I'll get this little hand and I could drag the image down. Forehead looks good. Nothing to do there. Nothing to do there. So I think we're good. There's some lint on her outfit, but I'm not going to worry about that. When you're zoomed in like this, you notice it. But when you're zoomed out, you can't see it. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. So did some blemish removal. We did the basic panel. I'm not going to tone it or anything like that. There's nothing I need to do in the HSL panel. I am going to get rid of some noise. Let's see, it was shot at ISO 200, but there is some noise in here. Generally speaking, I mentioned this many times in this video series, you want to remove noise first, then sharpen. It's much more difficult to remove any noise if you sharpen the noise. Sharpening the noise makes the noise harder to get rid of. But with that said, Lightroom, these sliders all work in conjunction with each other. So it's not essential that in Lightroom you remove noise first, then sharpen. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to make any difference. But if you use an external noise reduction program, take sharpening, in my opinion, you should take sharpening all the way down, send the image to that external plug-in to remove noise, then bring it back and then do some sharpening on it. Now in this case, the noise isn't so obnoxious that we have to worry about sending it to an external plugin. Lightroom will do just fine. I'm mainly worried about the noise on her. I just don't want, I want her to come out good, and I'm not really worried about anything else. I'm going to turn sharpening up a little bit. Now sometimes, and it might be in this case, we'll zoom out. If you sharpen, you're sharpening everything. So you could kind of mask too. In the mask, you have a little more control of what's being sharpened, but you can still see we are sharpening quite a bit of the image here. So another thing you could do if you don't want to use this sharpening is take this sharpening down, then get a brush. Then you would get a new brush. Double click on the word new. Double click on the word effect to reset everything. And then you would go to sharpness and you would bring sharpness up. And we could just brush in the sharpness where we want it on her mainly. You don't really normally sharpen the skin, but in this case, because she's far away, I don't think it matters. And you might want to sharpen her tattoos and down here. So this is an alternative way to selectively sharpen the image where you want it or where you need the sharpening. And you won't be sharpening back here. I want this as blurry as possible in the background. And if I go and sharpen it, I'm defeating the purpose. So typically, you're going to want to sharpen hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, lips, and even nostrils. Beyond that, then you don't really need to sharpen the skin, but in this case, I don't think it hurts. We're trying to kind of get this warmth look on their face, and I think it will help with that. So we did that brush stroke. Now I think I'll do something a little bit more off the wall. I'm going to get the radial filter, and I'm going to reset it by double-clicking on the word effect. And I want to get a color. So I'm going to click on this little swatch right here. And I want to get yellow more towards, a little bit towards orange. All right, just very saturated. And then what I'm going to do, make sure that the invert mask checkbox is checked and that feathering is all the way up. The next thing I need to do is make sure that the image is zoomed out like a lot. So what I'm going to do is go up here, and where it says 1 to 8, you can see how we're zoomed way out now. The reason being is I'm going to put, the sun is coming from our camera left, Julie's right. The sun is over here. She's looking off into the sun. I'm going to enhance that a little bit. But I don't want the sun to be right here. I want it to be out here. So we're going to do this. And we could bring it lighter like this. Now I could zoom back in to fit and kind of get an idea what it looks like. If it's a little bit too obnoxious, I could reopen my swatch, and this slider at the bottom is now at 97%. I could bring it down. So we're keeping the same color, but we're just lowering the intensity or the saturation of the color. So we'll bring it down a little bit. So there's before and there's after. So it turned out to be a rather subtle adjustment, but I think it's nice. It adds a little bit to this shot. And I never did lens corrections, which I normally try to do earlier in my workflow, and you could see how it brightened everything up considerably. And you know, a lot of times that will just drive me nuts because I forgot to do it. Watch. See how it just brightened things up quite a bit? What it did basically is remove vignette, any vignette around it, and it kind of then made everything a little brighter than what I was going for. So we could come up here in the basic panel, I mean, if it bothered me enough, and I could just bring exposure down. Because I want it to be more like sunset. And when you approach sunset, the brighter parts, there's more contrast in the image, basically. You're going to have the sun, relatively bright where it's hitting, but you're going to have some deeper shadows also. So I want that. So I just bring down exposure by 1/3 of a stop. And on top of that, we're going to go down to effects, and I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette. And I would say the image is done. So there is, oops, didn't want to do that. I hit the wrong key, excuse me. There is before, and there's after. Before, after. Of course, we did crop it, and that before, after is not reflecting the crop. So there's before, and there's after. So that's it for this episode, most likely the last episode of this video series. Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Julie, for sharing your image with us. And thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.